Let's see if I... Oh! Hello! I didn't see you there. Well, I suppose while you're here I might as well find something to talk about. Hello everyone, ZerkMonsterHunter here, or as I look like at the moment, the likely offspring of Shaggy and Velma from Scooby-Doo. It's a bit ironic my big return to YouTube has to do with Lynn, seeing as how it's a running joke I should have ended ages ago. But, alas, here we are. I've made a lot of mistakes, and this video is probably going to be one of them. Lynn has made a recent surge in the last few years as one of the most popular yet divisive characters in the franchise. This is due in large part to the fact that she often gets an ult around the same time that Fire Emblem Heroes seems to shit the bed with a terrible update, and she gets blamed for a lot of things that really aren't her fault. In truth though, I am actually very glad Lynn's become popular. But that comes with this weird discourse that often mischaracterizes and warps Lynn into something she never was in her initial incarnation. But when you follow the trail of evidence for what these people are saying, there seems to be a large body of it. So what the hell happened? Well, that's what I'm here to examine today. I want to go through the wide world of Fire Emblem spin-offs and look at Lynn's evolution from past and likely into the future to see where her character trajectory might end up, and how we got where we are today. So strap in. Today we're going to be discussing how fanservice can warp a character.
Lynn has appeared in 4 Fire Emblem games as well as having been on several cipher cards. Fire Emblem spin-offs didn't exactly explode until Heroes and Warriors released in the same year. So across 7 Awakening Heroes and Warriors, we have 10 incarnations of Lynn with enough dialogue to make some conclusions. My goal with this video is twofold. Firstly, analyze bodily proportions of official Lynn art to see if there's been a noticeable shift in art direction. Secondly, analyze quotes from Lynn outside of Fire Emblem 7 to see if there's been a similar shift in character direction. With these criteria in mind, before we look at how they've changed, we need to establish a baseline control. And for that, we need to go back to Fire Emblem 7. In Fire Emblem 7, Lynn's character operates on 2 primary axioms: her connection to others and her personal cultural identity. Lynn is a very caring person. She has a long-standing friendship with Florina, and then develops strong bonds with Kent, Wrath, Sane, and then later Eliwood and Hector. She is outwardly emotional, breaking down in joyful tears at the mere sight of her grandfather, and offering many tender moments where she opens up with the Avatar Mark in the prologue, as well as with Eliwood and Hector later on in the story. Lynn's identity then manifests in her Sakaing heritage and upbringing from her father's side clashing with the nobility of her mother's side. Through both Lynn's mode and her supports in Eliwood's mode, Lynn's love of the plains results in homesickness, self-doubt, and an internal conflict between the responsibility she owes to her bloodline in Kaelin versus the nomadic life of personal freedom her heart yearns for. Several, but not all of these aspects make her way into her character design. Compared to Wrath's laid-back and withdrawn posture, and Guy's assertive and arrogant pose, Lynn's body language as the third Sakaean character is inviting. Her gaze is firmly at the player, and the soft blues of her outfit make for an inviting, calming look. This design, however, doesn't convey the identity conflict that is at the core of Lynn's character arc. To illustrate what I mean by a character design conveying an identity conflict, let's look at Petra from Three Houses. Petra has a myriad of character design elements that juxtapose her school uniform with the rest of her appearance, most notably her hairstyle, her skin tone, and that mark beneath her eye. This means that when the payoff comes post-time skip of when she wears her traditional Brigidian outfit, it's incredibly impactful to see Petra's culture not repressed by the school arc anymore. Lynn doesn't really have this kind of setup and release in her art direction. Only when Lynn's outfit is viewed side by side with other Lycians and Sakaeans does the juxtaposition become clear. And this is part of a problem we'll begin to see later on with Lynn's character design in the modern era. The internal conflict of Sakae versus Kaelin that is present in her character is just not evidence at a glance. It's something that has lost relevance as other aspects of her personality that are perhaps more digestible or appealing to the mass audience are then prioritized. Given we've established the characterization of Fire Emblem 7 Lyn, and what her design does and doesn't convey visually, I'd like to present my control. Since this was the first key art piece of Lyn we got, it's what I'll compare every incarnation of Lyn afterwards to. I gathered all my data for this video using a grid, and by taking 3 measurements: bust width, thigh width, and forehead width. I chose a grid over pixel measurements due to varying resolutions of non-Fire Emblem heroes' renders, and because I assumed that if there was an upwards trend for proportions, it would be visible on a scale much larger than 10 to 15 pixels. Either way, this was what I found, and what I will be using as my control going forward.
There are 2 more things I'd like to mention about Lyn's characterization in FE7 that will be important going forwards. The first of which is that Lyn was intended as a tutorial-only character. This means that as the game goes on, as you get further and further away from the tutorial, Lyn's arc has already ended, and her role in the story and the conflict in the latter half of FE7 post-timescript is significantly reduced, simply because she wasn't really written for that story. Now, I never really saw this as a problem. Lyn's character arc in her mode is self-contained, and it wraps up quite nicely as she realizes that despite the struggle to reclaim Caitlyn, once she gets the chance, she'll move on to greener pastures, and in the meantime keep her grandfather company in his twilight years. Lyn shuffling to the background then is perfectly within character, as by then she's already grown into a complete character by the end of the tutorial. She doesn't really vocalize it, but she knows exactly how her life is going to go once her grandfather passes on. This is where I really have to give props to the English version of Fire Emblem 7 over the Japanese. FE7 is a game at its core about coming of age. Eliwood, Lyn, and Hector all need to rapidly grapple with the fact that the adults and figures of stability in their lives have gone away due to the events of the story. They need to step up and determine the kind of person they want to be. By making Lyn 18, or 19 in Eliwood's mode, in the English version, a full 2 years older than Eliwood and Hector, her coming-of-age story having already happened during the tutorial is thematically tied to her being the oldest of the 3 lords. This development allows her to then settle into a more supportive role for characters who don't have the same emotional maturity she's developed over the course of her mode.
This rant has nothing to do with the video. I'm just tired of seeing the argument that Lyn is irrelevant.
The other thing that comes from FE7 that I wanted to mention was that Solcati animation in the English version. This was the birth of Lyn's long history of successive iterations of her focusing on her aversion to supportive undergarments, coupled with her natural voluptuousness.
When making a modern interpretation of any fan-favorite character, you need to ask yourself what's more important: staying true to this character's original intent and characterization, or do you capitalize on the fan perception of this character for the sake of iconography? Now, as both a fanboy who loves that lowest common denominator iconography, and someone who also loves to really dig deep into good characterization and wants to see returning faces treated respectively, I can see why both options have their value. But which option did Intelligent Systems go with Lyn? Well, to figure that out, we need to jump forward in time a little, to the first time Lyn appeared outside of her own game, the Awakening DLC. Let's start with art direction. Lyn was one of the lucky legacy characters to receive new key art in the Awakening class designs for her, oh dear Naga, Einherjar? Anherjar? Energon?
Einherjar.
Yes, that. As you can see though, the proportions are fairly consistent with FE7 Lyn. Though there is a 1 square difference in bust size, at this point the data is too small to say if this is anything more than an art style difference. Upon recruit, DLC Lyn has a long conversation with Robin that largely serves as a nod to Robin and Mark both being tactician avatars and implying that they are reincarnations of each other. This acts as a fun 4th wall break for players who played both 7 and Awakening, thus it would be the same person. What I want to stress with this conversation is that the harmless nod equating Mark to Robin basically became the blueprint for Lyn's gradual shift into her modern incarnation. Simply put, the Awakening dialogue was the moment that Lyn's character became intrinsically tied to the Avatar, and Lyn began to stray dangerously close to becoming an Avatar sexual. What is an Avatar sexual, you might ask? Well, let's define our terms.
Hey, FE Sauce! Zerk here. A few years ago, I made a video called How Fire Emblem Does Fanservice Right. In that video, I argued that if you intrinsically tie character motivation and personality to fanservice, you are doing good fanservice. Or are you? Or are you making instead an avatar sexual? The term avatar sexual became part of the general Fire Emblem fans' vocabulary at around the time Fire Emblem Awakening and Fire Emblem Fates were at the height of their popularity. It was a derogatory statement used mostly against characters such as Camilla, Tharja, and Rajat to basically demean them and explain an actual writing problem that they had, which was that they were so intrinsically tied to the avatar in terms of it being the object of their infections, it negatively impacted their writing as characters, hence the term avatar sexual. Unfortunately for the term, it is often used mostly in a toxic or demeaning way, and has really kind of lost whatever it originally meant. But since it's the only term we've got, it's the one I'm going to use.
Following Fate's roaring success, Fire Emblem became one of Nintendo's flagship cash cows. This brought with it the bounty of spin-offs. And in 2017, the year of Echoes, the Nintendo Switch, and Fire Emblem Heroes, the renaissance of modern Lyn began. In 3 years, Lyn saw 8 reinterpretations or alternate costumes. It became clear to me at this point that dwelling on each one as I have for Awakening and Fire Emblem 7 would make us sit here forever and this video hours long. So, let's go through things quickly and chronologically.
Who are you?
Fire Emblem Heroes launched in 2017 with Lyn as a launch unit. Her proportions seem fairly consistent with her original Fire Emblem 7 incarnation, with a slight uptick in bust, made noticeable by how she's doing her best Nine Valmira impression by crossing her arms beneath her breasts. Bride Lyn was on the second ever FE Heroes seasonal banner in June of 2017. The large dress had to make me resort to using the damage dart to get all 3 of my measurements in a single portrait. When possible, I tried to use neutral or attack portraits to reduce the chance that the pose would affect the data. However, Bride Lyn scores very similar to FE Heroes Lyn, with a half square moved from bust to thigh. Since the first 3 Lyn alts all shared an artist, I was expecting similar proportions throughout. September 2017 gave us Brave Lyn, and thus the first spike we see in this dataset. She boasts a 6 square bust with a 3.5 square thigh. This is, however, overall fitting, as Brave Lyn is supposed to depict an older Lyn after the events of Fire Emblem 7. Later that same month, Warriors came out. Worth noting that Lyn, like most things in Fire Emblem Warriors, is largely recycled. From the neck down, Warriors Lyn has the same model of Camilla. More on that later. Some generous juticle physics and the largest proportions from my initial data set give her far and away the highest proportions, with a bust of 6.5 and a thigh of 3.5. The next Lyn to enter FE Heroes was Valentine's Lyn during the 1-year anniversary. Like with Bride Lyn, I had to use her damage dart to get a thigh measurement. She scores identically to Bride Lyn. In April 2018, Legendary Lyn came onto the scene and shares an artist with Valentine's Lyn, but in stark contrast, she has the smallest forehead width at 3.5. This means that despite having a bust that equals the control, her ratio of bust to forehead is higher, like much of the other Lyns on this list. Additionally, Legendary Lyn boasts the largest thigh thickness, being the first and only one to have thighs wider than her forehead. Summer Lyn was released a little more than a year later in August 2019. Despite having the most radically different art style, her proportions actually surprised me, as she scores just above the control, landing in the middle of the pack. For the 3-year anniversary, in February 2020, Resplendent Lyn arrived on the scene. Drawn by Kaboon, and thus the last artist to draw an official piece of Lyn art, Resplendent Lyn boasts the second largest thigh measurement and overall gives Warriors Lyn a run for her money in terms of total proportions, losing only slightly in terms of bust but winning in terms of thigh.
At this point, I knew I was onto something, I just wasn't sure what. But, after crunching the numbers, this is what I came up with. You, may want to pour yourself a drink. This data's going to be a bit of a doozy. First things first, after measuring every proportional ratio for each Lyn, I came up with this table. Highlighted in blue are every instances where a later Lyn beats the control in a given ratio. Now, as you can see, since this chart is ordered mostly chronologically, the blue gets more and more solid as you go down the chart, especially for the thigh column. Now, this basically indicates an upward trend. But it became clear to me shortly thereafter that this data was flawed, namely because it doesn't account for all the variables. Bride Lyn and Valentine's Lyn both clearly have larger busts in their key art than Fire Emblem 7 Lyn, but the data didn't seem to reflect this. So why are they just more curvaceous? Well, I needed to figure that out, so I had to go back and take more measurements. I had to add another axis, so I measured volume. So I went back to measure. And after measuring bust protrusion and adding 5 extra data points, I came up with something very interesting. Firstly, the 5 data points I added. I added the neutral portraits for Bride and Valentine's Lyn. This was because not only did visually in their neutral portraits they looked like they had a larger bust compared to their damaged ones, I also mentioned earlier that I chose neutral portraits to avoid the fact that poses might affect my measurements, so naturally I went back and added their neutral ones. I also added 3 cipher cards, namely only from artists who had already drawn Lyn in Fire Emblem Heroes, essentially to minimize the chance that a new artist might have affected my measurements because their style has a certain proportional relation. The results were very telling. The final column showed the most drastic difference in terms of proportional relations between Fire Emblem 7 Lyn and all of her modern incarnations, being the most solid blue and pretty much indicating there is just a generally higher curvaceousness, if my data is to be believed. In fact, I graphed this whole thing chronologically by order of release, and this is what it looks like. As you can see, there is a slight downtrend in terms of bust width, but this is because of a very specific outlier, namely Cipher card B07-009N drawn by Kaboon for Cipher Series 7 in 2016, being so early in modern Lyn's history and having the highest proportions of any Lyn I measured in this video, in fact getting so close as to having breasts almost larger than her head. Naturally, this was clearly an outlier, just judging by its timeline. But if you sort by artist, as in this table, you can tell that it's actually fairly consistent with Kaboon's other depictions of Lyn, namely Resplendent Lyn and his other cipher card. In fact, again, sorting by artists, you can tell that Kaboon boasts 3 of the top 5 Lyns in terms of bustiness and thighliness. Is that a word? Either way, why Kaboon of all of these artists? Why does he boast such high ratios? Well... Honestly though, Kaboon is actually one of my favorite artists working for Fire Emblem right now. Known mostly for his work on Azure Lane, Kaboon is probably known by most players as the artist for Reinhardt in Fire Emblem Heroes, but he's done a lot more than that. He's basically been with the series since Cipher started. Now, if you take one look at Kaboon's portfolio and what pieces of art I'm more familiar with, namely Spring Kagero and Igren, you can tell pretty easily that Kaboon likes to draw his women well endowed, and this absolutely applies to every artist rendition he's done of Lyn. Now, if you've done your research like me and you've looked through Kaboon's Twitter, you can see exactly where his priorities lie. All I can really say about Kaboon is the man has zero chill, and I absolutely cannot wait to see what he does with Shamir. So, with that in mind, I basically figured out that B07-009N was a huge outlier, and I decided to remove it from all the chronological data, and I replaced it with a median between Awakening Lyn and Fire Emblem 7 Lyn to create this chart, which you can much better see the upwards trends now that this huge outlier is gone. To me though, the biggest smoking gun though was my final experiment. I took 3 versions of Camilla, released at similar timelines to versions of Lyn, and decided to take their measurements as well. Comparing it to the data that I had gathered, I found that for each of the 3 Camilla alts that I took, I found a version of Lyn that either matched or beat Camilla in terms of ratio proportions. Warriors matches up, in fact, 1 for 1, as I expected and explained earlier with them sharing the same model from the neck down. And the only real difference is in the thigh, and that's literally, you can attribute that to the fact that Camilla is wearing leg armor and Lyn is not. To me, this data suggests that even across artists, even across 3D renders that recycle other characters' animations, and even across Kaboon for being a total mad lad, Lynn's proportions in all of her modern incarnations are not only fairly consistent, but also consistently increasing. And it's hard to attribute to this anything. How do you explain this widespread upward trend unless it is coming from the art director? Now, the reason why this would come from such a high place is incredibly hard to say, and I don't work at Intelligent Systems, so I can't say. But I think it boils down to exactly what you think. There is a motive to make Lynn curvier, because there is a market for fanboys who want to romance her. It's kind of sad, really, but is there a character change to go along with this art direction change? Well, that was my next step in my investigation, and it's exactly what I found.
As I stated earlier, Lynn's awakening conversation was the blueprint for her connection to the Avatar going forwards, and now I'd like to examine exactly why. In the original Fire Emblem 7, Lynn's big moments with the Avatar occur at the beginning and the end of the tutorial, where at first Lynn rescues the tactician and then travels with them after using them as a shoulder to cry on. They instantly forge a connection. What's distinct about this, however, is that we get the vibe that Lynn just needed someone to talk to, and we were that someone. Her kindness likely extends far beyond the Avatar. In the meantime, Lynn mostly uses the tactician for occasional counsel, and as more and more people get involved in the story, Lynn grows into her own person and no longer needs the tactician, making her goodbye at the end of the tutorial bittersweet and heartfelt. The Awakening DLC conversation functions as a reunion, sometimes more so than the actual one in FE7, which is largely just a footnote now that the story's focus is solely on Eliwood and Hector. The Awakening DLC starts by Lynn asking Robin several questions before finally asking if they remember a lead. If you answer yes, Lynn completely breaks down and the conversation gets very sweet and nostalgic. Compared to the other DLC conversations in Awakening, they mostly involve the Einherjar unit sizing up Robin to see if they're worthy of their service. Lynn's, however, is bar none the most intimate and is the only one that kind of reads like a support. This is made especially evident by the ending. Most of the other DLC conversations derive the legacy characters deeming you strong and then joining your army, whereas Lynn joins you because she wants to remain by your side, by the side of the tactician who was her shoulder to cry on all those years ago. This obsession with the tactician continues into the other Fire Emblem spin-offs. Most warrior supports are pretty empty, or just tongue-in-cheek about running gags in the Fire Emblem series, but Lynn and Robin's is an odd case. Like a lot of warrior supports, the fourth wall has been beaten to a complete pulp, with the joke of the support mostly focusing on how Lynn has an excessive attachment to protecting tacticians. Throughout the whole thing, however, Robin concludes how attached Lynn is to the Fire Emblem 7 avatar, and Lynn speaks of them incredibly longingly, as if a part of her has been missing and she's replaced it with Robin.
But no matter how good you get, you'll still let me protect you, right?
Of course, Lynn. If it'll make you feel better, I'll rely on you from now on.
Just leave it to me, Robin.
It feels so strange that this is hammered in so hard by the support, and that Lynn and Mark were attached at the hip, and that it's also specifically happening with Robin. Most of Lynn's other supports in Fire Emblem Warriors either reference her life on the plains or are strictly character comedy. To have one that digs so deep into another Fire Emblem 7 character, and have that be the avatar of that game instead of, say, Eliwood, her grandfather, or Hector, makes this support really stand out. Most of the time, those other FE7 characters just get a passing mention. Lastly, let's take a look at Lynn's dialogue in Heroes. For the most part, Heroes' dialogue is a mixed bag. Sometimes you're blessed with amazing captures of characters like Leon, and other times you get zero substance fluff. Lynn's dialogue is unique in that, while a lot of Heroes' dialogue does orbit around the summoner, Lynn is especially noticeable in this regard. Aside from Resplendent Lynn, each Lynn alt has at least 3 dialogue options that directly address the summoner, and these quotes are each among their longest, many of them often coming off as overly attached or familiar. Brave Lynn addresses the summoner by far the most, mentioning dreams, how much they care, and even likening the summoner to the FE7 tactician.
You're special to me. That feeling has been building for a long time. It crept up on me.
In addition, normal Lynn also talks about having to wake the summoner up, very enthusiastically mind you, and Resplendent Lynn, in her one instance of addressing the summoner, offers to warm you up.
I'm so fired up, I don't need these winter clothes.
However, where it really gets laid on thick are with Valentine's and Bride Lyn, as both of them have quotes that are outwardly romantic regarding the summoner.
I would never marry someone who couldn't stand at my side in battle. Hey, let's spar. It's said that if you give a present to someone you love during this festival, you just may wind up as a couple. So, is there anything you want?
What's weird about this whole thing, however, is that it's just the summoner. Although many other characters in FE Heroes will mention the summoner just as much, if they have siblings or close friends, they will also mention them by name in their quotes. Leon talks about the Renee twins, Eliwood mentions Hector and vice versa, Soren mentions Ike, and even Sonya has a line where she mentions her sisters, despite her desire to erase and escape her past and her family. Lyn only ever mentions her grandfather, and often only in one piece of dialogue per alt. Eliwood and Hector are only ever mentioned in text-only home screen pop-up dialogues, and are not mentioned at all in any spoken dialogue, even in passing or in vague terms. The only characters mentioned by name that aren't the summoner or Lyn's grandfather are her father by her brave alt, and Resplendent Lyn mentioning Fjorm and Gunthra. Even Camilla references her siblings outside of Corrin. At this point, I think I've made a fair case that there has definitely been a change in Lyn's art direction and one in her character direction as well. While I can't say what the future holds for certain, I do feel satisfied in saying that if Fire Emblem 7 ever gets remade, the Lyn we will meet in that game will be very different to the Lyn we met in 2003. Has Lyn become an avatar sexual? No, not yet anyways. While it may be concerning that her character is getting more and more closely intertwined with Avatar characters, Three Houses proved with its lords that characters who have arcs strongly tied to the influence of an Avatar character can work and can be incredibly compelling. The direction is still worrying, but until Lyn appears in a remake of FE7, we will never know the endgame of her increasing focus on the tactician. I wish I had the same hopeful outlook on the changes in art direction, however. I still stand by my opinion that if you intrinsically tie a character's sexuality into their motivation and role in the story, a sexualized design can very much work in the character's favor. Tharja and Camilla both adhere to this rule despite their other writing issues, and Sonya, who has what I consider the most attractive design of any female Fire Emblem character, still holds as my gold standard with her sultry, amazingly well done voice acting and driving mantra of powerful women should feel beautiful. The problem, however, with Lyn's growing sexualization in her art direction is that this was never an aspect, and is still not an aspect of Lyn's character. While one might argue that Lyn's desire with connection to others might be the motivator, this aspect of Lyn's arc was never explicitly romantic, and was almost always explicitly familial, whether that be the family she has in her grandfather or the family she chooses with her friends. Lyn does not have this complex about appearing beautiful and attractive like Sonya does, and nor is Lyn's sexuality played off as a running joke like Tharja, who is completely unaware of how attractive she is. In the simplest terms, Lyn's change in art direction is sex appeal for the sake of sex appeal, and that, by definition, is objectification. The Lyn we have now is slowly losing touch with the girl caught between cultures that we fell in love with, and is slowly becoming another pretty face among many. Compelling characters are appealing, but when you only prioritize the appealing and leave the compelling behind, that is how fanservice can warp a character.
Thank you for watching. This video was a mistake. Regardless though, I do hope you learned something from this giant mistake of a video, and I didn't just waste 9 hours of my life measuring fictional characters' bust sizes. If you're curious about my data and you want to get a good, long, hard look at it, I have a copy of it in the description down below. Please feel free to do all the YouTube things, you know, like, subscribe, hit that bell, I think, for notifications. I don't know how it works. YouTube changes it every 6 days at this point. And, yeah. My name is ZerkMonsterHunter 4. And no matter what fictional character you sleep with a picture of, as always, happy hunting. I guess I'll just pose next to it and wait for you to screenshot it and then Photoshop what I have off of it.